Welcome back, Journalism Media Week, day 3. We're nearly there. One more day to go. But we've got an absolute treat for you this afternoon. If you're like me and you love films and you love cinematic TV, then our next guest is absolutely in your wheelhouse. Editor-in-Chief in brackets digital for Empire Magazine and host of the Pilot TV podcast. Make some noise for James Dyer.
Hello.
Thank you so much, James, for popping along and travelling up and being with us on campus as well. Really, really lovely to see you.
It's very exciting to get out of the house. I've got to be honest with you. It's like we've had, I don't know about you guys, but I've been stuck in my study for what feels like a life sentence. So any chance really to get outside is nice. So
no,
thanks.
it's brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
No, and we really appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. There's loads to get through, and I wondered, first of all, obviously, because Empire is probably one of those brands that a lot of people maybe aspire to working at. And one thing we found out from Terry yesterday is it's actually quite a really small team that runs that magazine, which I found quite interesting, really. Was it film journalism always the avenue you wanted to go into yourself?
It was. Just on your last point, I remember once we had Dan Aykroyd in the office, and he was like, we had this big building in Shaftesbury Avenue, and he was like, wow, so is this building Empire? And we was just like, this desk is fucking Empire. Like this is the whole publishing company. Like, what are you talking about? But yes, but to answer your question, yes, I think, yes. Certainly from a journalism point of view, I film was very much the only really area of journalism that ever interested me. When I did my postgrad, because I was like a web designer for a short period of time, and I did a sort of 3-month postgraduate in periodical journalism at the London College of Printing. And when I did my interview for that, they were like, "Oh, where would you like to work?" I said, "Empire, I love Empire." And he said, "Well, where do you think you'll end up working?" I was like, "Empire, I'm going to work at Empire." And he was like, "Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to end up working for the Journal of Wound Care or British Waterways or something like that, because that's the reality of fucking journalism." And I was just like, oh, shit. And to be fair, he was right. Like, it was just blind luck, absolute blind luck that I ended up at Empire. But it worked out quite well. So.
How did you end up there then?
Oh, God. So, as I said, I was a website designer for a while. And like way back, bear in mind, I've been at Empire longer than at least some of you have been alive. So, back then, the internet was this curiosity. It was this sort of strange, arcane things, mystical knowledge. And so I took a gap year after I graduated with a theology degree, because, that's useful. And I learned how to do HTML. I thought, I'll make some websites. This looks quite fun. I'm unemployed. Fuck it, let's do this stuff. So I did that. And using that, I kind of got this web designer job. And then when I started to switch to journalism, it was kind of an unusual skill set. So when I actually, as part of the course, I did work experience at Empire. And while I was at Empire for that 1 week, I did 1 day at the website, which is in a different building. They were off in Farringdon. And I kind of find out how they work. I kind of looked at, the ins and outs of sort of how they put the site together. So when they advertised for an assistant online editor, which I was not qualified for, I kind of felt like I had a bit of a leg up. Like I kind of knew how they worked, and I knew the people as well, which helped. And I think because I had that skill set, and I remember in the interview, I said to them, look, I can code, I can design, and I can write. So literally, if all of you just die, I can just run the website by myself. And instead of being, as she should have been, fucking terrified, she gave me a job. So that's, that's nice. It's worked out. That was my first boss, Catherine Hanley, who I never did murder, although people haven't seen her in a while. So make of that what you will.
And where you said, obviously, film journalism was always going to be a thing. Am I right in thinking that, I mean, this is probably one of the coolest things, you were on the set of Empire Strikes Back?
That was a very long time ago. Yes. I would have been, I want to say 4. I think 4. Giving away my age quite badly there. Yes, I was. It was just because a family friend was an accountant and she worked on Empire Strikes Back, and set security wasn't then what it is now. And so she was like, yeah, come down, it'll be fine. So my mum brought me down. I was wearing a little red hot pants. It was the 70s. Hot pants and like this little shirt thing, and little mop-haired child. And I was afraid the spaceships were going to take off with me in them. But there's little pictures that I have evidence. Like there are pictures of me with R2-D2 and in the cockpit of the Falcon and stuff. So yeah, it was kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm not jealous about that.
Yeah, no, it was great.
No, fair enough. So when you come to, I'm always interested about sort of like reviewing films, and you get to do some really, really cool stuff when you're working for Empire, when you do set visits and that sort of thing. I'm wondering, is it difficult to then detach yourself, if you're really emotionally invested in a brand or a saga or a universe, that then when you go to see the film and you're having to review it, is it difficult then to detach yourself from it?
Yes, which is why Empire has a rule whereby no one who has done the set visit is allowed to review the film. So if you've done the interviews, if you've done the feature coverage, because there is a conflict there, we keep those people off the reviewing slate for those films, because it is difficult. Like if you've hung out on set and you see how hard people are working and what their vision is, and you've spoken to them, and then you're like, this film was a load of old shit, like it doesn't make you feel great about yourself. So yes, we try and limit that.
But also as well, if it's like say you going in and watching a Star Wars film and one of the newer ones coming out, you know, you almost, you know, certainly if I go in there, I'm sort of predetermined I'm going to love it because it's Star Wars. So I can't sort of like, do you have to detach yourself from that love to be able to then do a full criticism of it?
It's difficult, to be honest with you. I think reviewing and feature writing, I think, are on a par, possibly. They're very different skill sets, but they're the two hardest things, I think, to do. And writing a review is really, really difficult. I still struggle with it, been doing it for 20 years. Because you do need to review it for the publication, not for you, if that makes sense. So you got to think like, will our readers like it? Not, you know, I've read all the books for this thing, because I just did Wheel of Time. It's embargoed, and this is on the internet, so that's problematic. But I'm not reviewing this, but I may or may not have seen 6 episodes, and it may or may not be geared to people such as myself, who is a great big fucking nerd. And you know, the average person may struggle with that. So I have to kind of, when I review it, I can't be like, well, I've read all 15 of these books, therefore I know my Aes Sedai from my White Cloaks and my Trollocs, whereas the average person will look at it, hear Trollocs, and go, fuck off. And I understand that. So when I write this, I've got to have these people in mind. Like, so yeah, there is a bit of that to it. But I actually, weirdly, I think we try and send the person who is most geared to liking things. So if someone has in their head, think this is going to be great, this is going to be great, that's the person I want going to see it. I don't want the person who's decided ahead of time, this is going to be shit. You know, you kind of want, we had this kind of every day is Christmas Eve ethos at Empire, which is like, we try and think all films are good until they're not. And so that's why we have people like Ben Travis around, because he's a little ball of optimism. So we'll send him off. Yes, go, you see this film, so that I don't have to. And then he comes back and says Rise of Skywalker is great, and then I have to not talk to him for long periods of time. But it is what it is.
Has been a, I suppose the only way to put this, have you ever had a 5-star Attack of the Clones moment, like some of your colleagues have?
The one my friends would bring up was probably Passengers. You see Passengers, Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt, yeah.
I gave that 4 stars, and the poster quote, Titanic amongst the stars, which they pulled out of my review. Wow. I've never really got away from that one. That was not my finest hour, perhaps. But yeah, we all make mistakes. Like you'll slag off a film, and then so actually I reviewed a film last year called The Old Guard, which is on Netflix, and I really didn't like it at all, and I think I gave it 2. And then other people in the office had seen it and said, well, we really liked it. And I was like, no, I didn't. So I sat down, I watched it again, and I was like, I don't know what mood I was in when I saw this, but it's a lot better than I thought it was. And so I actually did a kind of a walk back where I was like, do you know what? I'm actually going to change my review on this. I was actually wrong. Like I did get it wrong. Like this was, you know, it must have been just the mood I was in when I saw it. Maybe I wanted it to be something else. Maybe I had a preconception. Who knows? But we all do it. Like we all will get things wrong. Attack of the Clones is not a 5-star film. Chris will be the first one to tell you that. But you know, it happens.
Do you think some of it is time pressure as well? Because I think, you know, sometimes when you've watched a film, you've got such pressure now to get a review out within this social media age. You know, reviews are coming out so quickly, and if you're having to write 1,000 words, you know, in 30 minutes after you've watched a film, that's sort of like pressures. It's quite a lot. Your initial feelings may not be your feelings 24 48 hours later.
Yeah, I think your opinions can change over time a little bit. I think generally speaking, like your gut is a pretty good indicator. Like when you come out of a film, like what sits with you, what stays with you in that moment is a good thing to go with. I write really slowly, so I don't tend to do those quick turnaround reviews. In fact, I avoid them like the plague, because you have to be able, like everyone has. I actually find it really interesting talking to different writers about their process, how they actually write stuff. Like some people in the office will do all of the prep mentally, and then what they'll put out as their first draft will essentially be like their final draft. Like it'll be publishable material. My first draft is basically pigeon English. Like it's just nonsense. Like I wouldn't let anyone look at it. It's just horrific. It'll just be like blah blah blah, literally XXX, something interesting here, blah blah. Because I kind of, the way my brain works, I need to have the structure down, and then I'll go through and flesh it out as I go. And obviously that takes slightly longer, so it's more difficult when you're doing a quick turnaround thing.
Yeah.
But there's no right or wrong way, I think, to write things. Everyone does it differently. It's just, you know, as long as you get a decent end result, it doesn't massively matter.
Do you take notes during the film? Because I tend to forget stuff from 5 minutes ago. Yeah. So I don't know how you're taking notes during the film. Are you on a laptop, or how do you actually do it?
No. Laptop is the kind of thing which will get a security guard staving your head in, which is never good. But so if I'm reviewing, I will take notes. I don't like to review a film if I've not been in there to review it, because I think you watch a film differently. So this is why, for example, I don't review Star Wars films if I can avoid it, because I like to enjoy them. Yeah. And if the first time you watch it, you're reviewing it, you don't enjoy it because you're watching it differently. So I think like when you're trying to review a film, you're sitting there, you're looking at the shots, you're looking at the composition, you're very aware of the filmmaking, and you're very much in a seat watching a film. And I think like how I like to watch films, how I like to enjoy films, is to kind of project yourself into the world and live it for 2 hours and then come crashing back to earth at the end of it. But that's not conducive to reviewing. So it does change the way that you consume media, definitely.
Yeah. I think a lot we sort of like talk about this on the way up, that, you know, from the outside in, people will look at working for Empire and it's, you know, a very cool job. You get to do some really cool things, but that, you know, there's obviously normal pressures that you'd have from a job that you're working at. What's the coolest thing, do you think, about working at Empire for you?
Weirdly, it's kind of the people, and part of that is specialist publications tend to have the best editorial teams, only because you are all united by a common passion point. Like you all love one thing, so you have that in common, so you're all going to get on because you've already got this common ground, which isn't always the same with lifestyle publications. So Empire's always been a bit of a family. Like we all hang out, like we all see each other all the time. One of the reasons that we started doing the podcast, I think, as I was mentioning to you before, is that we used to have these conversations in the office. We'll be raging about this or arguing about Attack of the Clones and whatnot. And people find it quite engaging to listen to. So we're like, oh, let's just record the shit, you know. And that's what the podcast essentially was. It was just us doing what we do, but in a slightly more organized fashion. But yeah, it is the people. Like we go on film sets, we see films early, we do all that kind of stuff. But our job essentially is to watch films and then write about them, to talk about them, to interact with each other about them. So what you're essentially being asked to do is discuss the things you love with people that you love. And that's not a bad way to start the day.
No, very, very good. I'm going to come on to the podcast because there's so much sort of unpack with the podcast. But for the magazine itself, and when we were talking to Terry yesterday of, you know, whether or not print magazines and the future for sort of print magazines, and you're running obviously the digital side of that magazine, and how do you see the future? I mean,
Mad Max, I don't know. I mean, look, it's we were talking about this on the way in as well. It's like, how do you talk to a lot of people who want to go into journalism and say that it's not as robust as it once was? I don't know. It is. Look, it's very different. I started at Empire in 2000. And it was a very different time. Like we were selling a shitload of copies. We were making a shitload of money, not us individually, but the publishing company. But equally, like we went on like an office trip to Barcelona because we had a particularly good sale once.
Oh, wow.
Nowadays, no one would even go to fucking Morrison's to get you coffee because there's no money for it. Like it's changed a lot. Like the studios would send you out, the first class course. Absolutely. That does not happen now, let me tell you. So there's less money everywhere. And I think, so print is quite a high margin business. Like it makes quite a lot of money. It's quite profitable. Digital is not. So it's fine to say that like people aren't buying print products, but everyone's moving online, but there isn't money online. Well, certainly nowhere near as much. Yeah. So, you know, without that money, you don't get budgets, you don't get the resources, you don't get the manpower, you don't get the salary. So everything kind of contracts with it. I can't remember the exact figures, but it is something like 95% of all online advertising money goes to Facebook and Google, and everyone else fights over the remaining 5%. I mean, and that's just ridiculous. But that is the world in which we live. So, you know, whether it's broadcast, whether it's print, everything is contracting. Lifestyle press has been hit a lot harder by that than specialists, because specialists are naturally quite resilient because people are very passionate about it.
Yeah.
If they're passionate about it, they will still buy magazines. Magazines incidentally are made up of paper. They were probably things you find in libraries and stuff. I know you people mainly use digital stuff, but they were cool ones. I like them.
Yeah, so I think certainly Empire's still the only one I think I still subscribe to.
So here's the thing.
one.
So like I have worked in digital pretty much my whole career. But I write for print as well. But there's the thing, like you talk to digital journalists and you talk to print journalists. Like fundamentally, print journalism, well, actually, print writing is better than digital writing, and that's a controversial thing to say, especially people working digital. But there is a reason for that, and it's like when you have a print magazine, there is one piece of marketing on a print magazine, and it's the front cover. That's its only job is to get people to pick it up and buy it. So it's a commercial proposition. But the rest of it, every word in that magazine is just about sounding as good as it can possibly be, being as entertaining as it possibly can. That's what it's there for. So the writing is so precise and beautifully crafted because it can be. Digitally, that's not the case, because every word is either competing for, search engine algorithms, or, is this properly optimized? Have I got keywords in here? Is an H1 up there? Do I have meta tags? Or do I have a social headline? Is this for search? Is it for social? Like everything in it is doing a lot of work. So, I love a good pun. I really do. So I love print headlines with beautiful wordplay. When Nick had a sidebar for The Sopranos about, watching the best episodes, and he called it Bada Binge, I was like, that's made my fucking day. Do you know what I mean? But you do that on the website and the search engine will be like, I do not understand. What does this mean? They can't do it. And so I think a lot of the craft of what makes writing fun has to take a kind of back seat when you're doing stuff digitally. And that's a bit of a shame. Not completely, because, you have social headlines and you can distribute stuff a variety of different ways, but it's just understanding that they are quite different disciplines, and digital writing is a lot more involved and complex because it has to do a lot more.
How much do you think, social media is obviously a massive part of the industry now as well, certainly when it comes to sort of like, instant reviews of different things, be it TV shows, be it film. How much pressure do you feel that you have to have that social media presence, and do you enjoy it or not?
I think me, like everyone else alive, I have a love-hate relationship with social media. It is necessary for all brands, really, because like nowadays, a lot of people consume their news and content via their Twitter feeds, by their Facebook feeds.
Yeah,
you should be Twitter. Facebook's awful, but Twitter's awful too. But it's my kind of awful. So you kind of have to engage with people that way. It's like you remember way back before these guys were born, people wanted to know if a film was good. They had two options. They read it in a newspaper or magazine, or they went on fucking CFAX. Google it. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then suddenly the internet came along, and it was the great leveler. Like information became devalued. Like we were the gatekeepers of information. We had it, you didn't. We could charge what we wanted for it. We have seen this film, you have not. There is no way for you to find out if this film is good unless you come to us. And then suddenly the internet's there, and we're like, everyone knows this shit before we even know it. Like, and so where do we fit into this?
Yeah.
And it's made things a lot more difficult. And so the internet, I think, devalued a lot of what's journalism was at some point. But now you have a whole other thing, which is that most of the stuff on the internet is bollocks. So you have to kind of cut through that. And it's all about trusted sources. So, I mean, the way I use the internet, if I Google something, what I do is I will scan down the list of URLs and look for a brand that I recognize and trust. And I will click on that link. And it's all about trust for me, because I just assume that most of it is nonsense. That it's either just bad journalism, or worse than that, it's, search farms or people with interests in whatever it is. It's trying to find something you can trust. And that's a whole different thing. And this is, I think, where Empire does very well. That Empire is a heritage brand, and it is a name that people trust. It is a name that people in the industry certainly trust.
Yeah.
That loads of people, in the film industry read Empire. So I think that helps us a lot. And so Pilot TV, which is kind of like Empire for TV, which we started up a few years ago, like that, just to get a foothold has been more difficult because it's a new brand. It's a new voice in a sea of infinite voices. So it's how do you get cut through without that legacy? And it's actually quite challenging.
Yeah, I think it's interesting about Pilot as well, because certainly when Terry was talking about it yesterday, it was, I can't believe that no one was really doing that about cinematic TV, because Netflix was huge then, but no one was really doing what you're doing, and that's why it's probably become as successful as it is.
Yeah, I think we definitely saw there was a niche there, because even for us, like, it's like, where do you even begin? There is so much stuff on television, and it's just trying to cut through it all to find the good stuff is quite challenging. And so we were like, well, we can do a magazine about this. Like, absolutely we can. And I think honestly, had it not been for the pandemic, we might yet be a physical magazine. But I think the pandemic pretty much accelerated the decline of the newsstand by about 5 years. So I think going back on newsstands now is really a non-entity. But you know, as a podcast, you know, it works. It fulfills a purpose. You know, we like to think we're useful.
Oh, well, I think so. Definitely.
Good.
Definitely. Talking podcasts then, and we were just discussing a little earlier, but it's 2012 that the Empire podcast started. So it's nearly 10 years old now, which is quite staggering, really. You're one of the first real, I mean, Kermode and Mayer were doing their thing, but apart from that, film podcast wise, you were pretty much one of the first.
Yeah, it was a very long time ago. I'd like to say we had sort of grand ambitions for it, but it really was nothing of the sort. We just thought it'd be a laugh. We just went in. We were lucky enough that there was a kind of studio space because he had their own radio channel, so they had their little recording booth. So we used to sort of jump in there. We had some massive fights with them over using that booth. But yeah, it was a giggle. And it's like, I mean, Chris, you know, is the heart and soul of the Empire podcast. And a lot of it was just his passion and willingness to sort of just, you know, take on another full-time job to get it off the ground. But it has been so much fun. Like, it's great. And really, during the pandemic, I think it worked both ways. Like, audio is a really interesting medium in that there's something emotional. There's an emotional connection to audio that doesn't exist in other mediums, where if you listen to a podcast, like podcast host, podcasts that you love, like you feel you know these people. They're in your ears. I get it too. I was at an awards thing and Deborah Francis White walked in and I was like, Deborah Francis White, like presents the Guilty Feminist podcast. But I've listened to it for ages and I'm like, she's amazing.
Yeah.
I lost my shit over it. And you know, people think, because you feel like friends with these people. And I think during the pandemic, loads of people contacted us and said, like, it's meant so much to us that you guys have still been doing the podcast, you know, because we immediately went to Squadcast and Riverside and started doing it remotely and we pressed on for it. But I think it was really good for us as well, because we weren't in the office together, we weren't seeing each other, so we weren't able to have the discussions that we used to have. So actually, you know, jumping onto Squadcast 3 or 4 times a week and doing these shows, it was an absolute lifeline. I think I probably would have gone insane without that. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, it's you know, it certainly is a sort of every week when it's a breath of fresh air when you've got, and you hit the nail on the head there. It's like, you know, you're with friends, I think, each and every week, and you get to know the characters and the personalities, and that's really, really quite powerful. Obviously, I think a lot of podcasts struggle because, one, maybe they can't monetize, which is like if a company sort of produce podcasts, they maybe struggle to sort of monetize podcasts. And that's something that probably the Empire podcast wasn't doing for quite a long time, but they sort of like kept at it. And now there's different sort of like areas you can go in with subscriber versions. So I always think it's interesting with podcasts on, you know, people often ask me, you know, well, how do you make money out of them? And you say, well, most of the time you probably don't really. I don't know what it's been like with Empire, because like you said, it was more of a passion project really for you guys.
Yeah, it was, but like, we have to make money or the company at some point tells us we can't do it anymore. Yeah. So, which is ultimately why we have the Spoiler Special podcast. We weren't like, look at all the money we can make for Bauer. It was more just like, we spend so much of our time doing this fucking podcast. Someone is going to make us stop unless we start bringing in some cash. So the Spoiler Specials went behind a paywall and it wasn't hugely popular, but it's not a lot of money and we thought it was worth it. And it now brings in enough revenue that like it keeps the wolves from the door and it lets us do all the other stuff. Because like making the podcast isn't, you know, it's not epically expensive, but it's not that cheap either, especially if you try, like Chris and I tend to edit most of the stuff ourselves, but when you bring in editors, like that price shoots up.
Yeah,
you know, and we had a producer at one point as well, and again it's just like then the cost starts to become a bit prohibitive, but it's just very time consuming if you take on, like, you know, producing, editing, writing, and then presenting and all these different aspects of it. So you do have to find ways of doing it. Like Empire, you know, we have a dedicated ads team. I think they struggled initially at first to kind of translate that to sort of monetizing podcasts, because they were like, oh, this is uncharted territory, we don't really know how to do it. Like, you can go on a network like Acast or whatever it is, where they take a cut and they'll sell adverts for you, like that's an option. But large publishing companies tend to resent giving cuts of revenue to third parties, so they're like, no, we'll sell it ourselves. Sure, go for it. You know, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. We would like them to make more money, because then we could do more of them. But as long as they kind of wash their own face, as it were, then that's, you know, that keeps us in business.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Really, with podcasts and the pilot podcast itself. Again, you were a number of years with Terry and with Boyd. And again, like you say, that sort of like gang culture you had with the Empire podcast. You got that very, very quickly with Terry and Boyd.
Yeah, but I mean, you say that like, again, I've worked with Boyd for 20 years. Like he works on Heat, obviously. But again, I first met Boyd in 2000, like, because he's worked for the company as long as I have, or longer than I have, actually. And Terry and I were kind of thick as thieves, I think, from quite early on. Like, we got on like a house on fire from when she started at Empire. And we had a lot of laughs and we're still good friends. So, which is nice. So it was lovely. Like, we used to look forward to sort of jumping in the room and talking about this stuff. We'd had so much fun making the podcast. I think both of us used to say that was the highlight of the week. And like, bearing in mind what we do during the week, that's quite a tall order. But just coming in there and just spending a couple of hours, just like, we'd be in tears of laughter, just like by the end of it. I think part of the reason that's why the show works, because we get on very well, because we have so much fun doing it. I think that kind of comes across. It's the same with writing. I always say, if you don't enjoy writing it, no one's going to enjoy reading it. Yeah. I think, again, with a podcast, if you're bored making it, it will be boring to listen to. So you kind of, that fun needs to translate.
And I often wonder as well is how you select the TV shows, because like you said earlier, there's so much TV out there at the moment to pick and choose from, and how you select what you're going to review and the amount of TV you must watch in the week to be able to review that. How does that all work?
We have a WhatsApp group and we argue about it, ultimately. Is what it is. I'll be like, yes, the next series of The Expanse is coming out. And they're like, oh, fuck off. And it's just like, no, we're definitely doing it. And Terry's like, well, I've got this council estate drama. And if we're doing that, we're fucking doing this as well. So it becomes a little bit of horse trading because we have slightly different sensibilities. But yeah, and then it'll be logistics. It'll be like, when are there embargoes that are going to cause us problems? What are we going to get access to? Like, Star Trek Discovery's out next week, so we should be doing that in the podcast we record tomorrow, but there is no sign of screeners for it anywhere. So I guess that's not going to happen. Wheel of Time is out next week as well, but that's embargoed until Tuesday night, so that doesn't help me either. So it's just like, so then we're like, okay, so what's left? So, you work your way around it. There's always problems, even with the print magazine. It'd be like, well, this is embargoed to there, or we can't get to a screening of that before we go to print. Like, you just kind of have to work around these obstacles.
I suppose that's quite frustrating as well, isn't it? Because I would imagine, and in fact, even in this week's episode, that the way certain things are sent to you and how you can watch them differs from one company to another. Dexter New Blood, you couldn't watch on the TV, which seems unbelievable.
Yeah. It is. It's a shame. Like, I get the piracy concerns. I do. But I think, like, certain people like Netflix do it very nicely. So Netflix, it's just like watching normal Netflix, but you have a little preview section. You press your preview thing, you type in a pin so that no one else in your household can watch it. And then it just has a little watermark at the very top, normally on the black widescreen bit, so it's not on the picture, which normally has your email address and the embargo details. Just like, it's really unobtrusive. And then you're watching certain other stuff like Amazon's ones, and it's got my email address in like letters that take up the entire screen, just across the middle. Or if I'm watching it on Boyd's account, it just says Boyd Hilton across the whole thing. And it's got to the point now when I watch anything on TV, I'm like, I miss it when it's not there. I'm like, I don't have Boyd's name on it. It's not proper television. But that's not a great way to experience it. It's not brilliant. And when they put it on platforms where you can't, AirPlay or Chromecast it, whatever, so you do have to watch it on a laptop. You're like, I can't help feeling this is not what the filmmaker had in mind when they made this, and yet this is my experience of watching it. Like, so if I'd reviewed Dune like that, like, what the fuck would that have been? You want to watch that in IMAX. Like, it's massive. It's a huge, and I felt really bad for Denis Villeneuve when HBO said, well, essentially when Warner said, I was going to go on HBO Max day and date. And he was like, will it fuck? Like, absolutely not. I mean, it kind of did, but not quite. But because it's pure cinema, that film is. It's the most cinematic thing you'll see all year. And I don't care how big your TV is, and I have a reason to be a big TV. But that's not how I want to watch it. It's not. It just isn't. So, that's a whole other rant. But
we're going to open up to questions very shortly. One question, actually, I saw a tweet of Disney Plus IMAX. What the hell's that?
I have no idea. You tell me.
I saw it.
Disney Plus IMAX.
They're bringing out. Did anybody else see this? Did you know?
Explain it to me.
What good is that if you've got just a normal sized TV?
Well, quite.
Okay.
See, that's kind of nuts. I remember when Zack Snyder came out with his, with the Justice League, the
15-hour one,
the Snyder cut of Justice League, and it's in black and white, sure, fine,
yeah,
but it's in 4:3, and it's just like, Is it though? Like, really? Like, come on, Zach, sort your shit out. Like, fine, if you're in an IMAX cinema, that's fabulous.
Look great.
But most of us don't have IMAX cinemas. We have 16:9 formatted televisions. And that looks shit. So it's just like, I don't like this like, why do it? Why? Just why? It's not how people watch films. And I think, like, maybe these things are marketing lines, maybe it's just a cool thing to be able to badge it, but you have to think about how people are going to consume it, how they're going to experience it, how you want that to come across. And I just think, you know, taking up like a third of your TV maybe isn't the best.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, let's open up to questions. Some Mark's going around with the wireless microphone. He's just doing the tappy. It's working. Okay, Sam with the first one.
What is your favorite ever movie, and what's the favorite thing about your job?
Oh god, my favorite ever movie is Aliens. Funnily enough, we're doing our vote at the moment for the 100 greatest movies, which Empire does about once every 5 years. And this year we are doing it, so we're doing half of it voted by readers, and the other half is critic voted, which is kind of like, so we can mix it up a little bit. And so I'm actually having to crystallize my top 20 at the moment. Fuck me, is it difficult? Like, my number one is Aliens. It's always been Aliens, but then it's very difficult to kind of distill that down. Aliens is a film that I watched when I was far too young to watch it, but I was obsessed with it just because everything about that film is perfect. The fact that it's a completely different genre to the original, the way it's an escalation, it doesn't try and repeat what the original did, but it maintains the spirit of it. Everything from the production design to the Foley artistry, like the sound the pulse rifles make, just like everything is so precise. And I remember I've interviewed James Cameron a few times, and every time I've managed to steer the conversation just to Aliens. I just want to talk about Aliens. Tell me about Aliens. And he gets really funny about it, I think, because if you'd watch it, it's like it's a 35mm shoot, but it's quite grainy now. And I think that bothers him because he's very much one for fidelity these days. So I think when looking back on how grainy it is now, so he's never done a 4K restoration of that, or indeed of many of his other films. But I do desperately want him to do something with it, like to actually give us that in 4K. That would be lovely. But yeah, that's my favorite film. What is my favorite thing about working at Empire? Honestly, it's kind of, as I said before, it's just the people I work with. Like, there are very different schools to what employment should be for people. For some people, it's like, I want to retire when I'm 40. It's like, good for you. What are you going to do after that? You know, they want to earn a certain amount of money. They want to have this car. They want to live in this house. And I've very much been one for sort of journey over destination. Anyone who's read Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive will dig that. None of you have, but that's fine. But seriously, a journey over destination. So it's like, because you spend your whole life trying to get somewhere, trying to do something. Like, so if you're not having fun along the way, then what the fuck are you doing? You know, it doesn't matter how much you earn. I always think, like, if you can look forward to Monday morning on a Sunday night, then you're doing something right. And ultimately, that's what I've always got from Empire. It's the idea that the weekend ends, I'm like, brilliant, I've got work tomorrow. And that's all I ever really wanted. I wasn't looking for a Ferrari. I just wanted that kind of feeling so that my day-to-day grind, as it were, wasn't one.
Wonderful. Okay, Noah.
So you kind of touched on it before, saying like you obviously don't kind of review a film if you've got a bit of a vested interest in it. But this kind of comes out. Listen to the June spoiler special yesterday. That's like you and Helen are kind of quite interested in that. But when you kind of do like a feature or even a review, I guess, how do you kind of separate what's important to the reader and what you just specifically like about that genre or maybe like that franchise? You know,
It's often challenging. I suppose it depends on how you approach things. So for me, like, feature writing is storytelling. So what you're doing when you write a feature is you're thinking, right, I've got 2,500 words, 3,000 words, whatever your word count is. I am trying to tell a story, a piece of entertaining story. It should, you know, surely it should educate, it should inform, but it's entertainment. So you're thinking, so the building blocks of your narrative is you've been on set, you've done an interview, you've got some facts, you've got some quotes. And it's like, how do I turn these into a human interest story? So you're like, well, where's my in? So like, take The Predator, for example. I was like, I love Predator. It's one of my all-time favorite films. Shane Black was in Predator. He's making this new Predator film. It's not good, but that's neither here nor there. And I didn't know that when I was writing feature, but I was like, what's my way into this? How do I get into this? And the way into it is like, he was on He was in Predator when he was a young man. He's now having a midlife crisis, and this is his midlife crisis. Like, this film is his midlife crisis. He's making it with a childhood friend. He's reliving his youth. And that's your human interest story. So that's your way in. You talk about the old film, and you find sort of a through line, and it has like a 3-act structure to it. It has its highs, its lows, its dips. You know, you probably break it into sections with sort of thematic breaks. And by the end, yes, you've told the story of how a film went through production, but you've hopefully told a compelling, proper narrative story, and and with an ending which is satisfying as well, that maybe calls back to the beginning or does something else. So it's how you structure that, and reviews can often be that way as well. It's like, yes, I'm here to analyze this, and ultimately you want to know whether this film is good. I want to tell you whether it's good, but it needs to be entertaining. Do you make it funny? Is there an interesting way in? Can that be a little story, a little parable, which also tells you whether the film is good? Ideally, yes. So I think sometimes it's less about separating your personal opinions and more about how do I fit my opinions into a format that will also entertain. Because certainly from an Empire point of view, that's what we do. It's not just about, like, anyone could write a review. It's like, right, the acting is this, the story is this, the effects are this. I give this 3 stars. That's very tedious to read. You want to make it fun. You want to make it engaging. So at Empire, like, the quality of the copy is extremely important. That's not the case for all publications. Like, we are very, very hot on whether writing sings, as we often describe. But does it sing? And when you read it, does it really kind of like jump off the page? Oh, I fucking love that. It's a lovely turn of phrase. That's really important, as well as whether you know enough about film to form a critical analysis. Like, there's a lot that goes into it.
Jess.
You said about making mistakes or having sort of your popular opinion on a film review sticking out and rewatching a film thinking, yeah, I was overly critical. Is there a particular film that sticks out that you hated or didn't think was very cinematic at all, but is still reviewed really well, no matter how many times you watch it, you cannot get your head around?
I'm sure there are loads of them. But I always find funny, like, it's like film criticism, maybe slightly less so than music criticism, which I find, no disrespect to my colleagues at Mojo, madness, because music is all about emotion. Like, does a song resonate with you emotively? I don't give a shit whether it's derivative or whether it's constructed or what, meter it's in. It's just like, does it speak to me on an emotional level? So I always find like music reviews are weird that way. Film reviews, there is an element of that. I think like a film can resonate with you on an emotional level, and everyone else will think it's absolute shit, but you love it for that reason. And I'm sure I've got lots of them like that. But like Ben, who I work with, he loves The Rise of Skywalker. He thinks it's fabulous. And I hate it with the fire of 1,000 twin suns. And genuinely, it causes me pain. And I did all the features for that. Like, I wrote about it. I interviewed everyone from it, and it's got some great stuff kind of in it, very well hidden. But it wasn't what I wanted, I think, ultimately with that. And so that, and I don't understand why Ben likes it. And part of me wants to hurt him a lot sometimes because he likes it, because it makes no sense to me. But it's the thing. We're all subjective creatures. Do you know what I mean? Like, we all have a connection to something, or we don't, and it leaves us flat, or it doesn't. Like, when we talked about, well, we're on Star Wars, and when am I not? But like, The Force Awakens is a little bit derivative. It is. It's not particularly original. It's very safe. It covers familiar ground, but it gave me the warm and fuzzies. And I had this grin on my face through the first screening of that, like I've never had before. And it's one of the greatest cinematic experiences of my life, because it was fucking Star Wars. Like, it was new Star Wars, and it had all the stuff I wanted from it. And then The Last Jedi, which is, to my mind, an objectively better film. It is brave, it takes risks, it does new things, and I love everything about it, but it didn't get me on an emotional level the way Force Awakens did, even though it's a better film. Because there was just something there that didn't quite feel like Star Wars to me, even though I love it, and I love that it exists. And then Rise of Skywalker didn't either. But do you know what I mean? So it's a very different thing. And sometimes it's generational as well. Like, Ben's a lot younger than me. So I think he, I suppose when you grow up with the prequels, anything looks good. But I feel like I've got off point. I'm sure there was an answer to a question in there somewhere. So sure.
I think you definitely did. Okay.
I'm not sure if you're going to give the same film twice, but what's the worst film you ever watched, and what's the worst film you had to review?
See, the thing is, people always say, oh, give us your list of the worst movies. No one can give you that list. So Kim Newman, who's been writing for Empire since 1843. He has seen almost every film ever made. So it's like, you cannot ask what the worst movie is, because the worst movie you have seen is better than 90% of the films that Kim has seen, because he has seen all the movies. And there are films so bad, you can't even get through them. So I am 100% not qualified to say what the worst film ever is, because I try and avoid those kind of films. For me, it's less about whether a film is bad and more about whether a film is disappointing. So Rise of Skywalker, again, is an example of something where I wanted it to be one thing and it wasn't. But yes, we do see genuinely bad films. Of course we do. You know, there are an awful lot of them all the time. Some of them are badly made, but no one sets out to make a bad film. And that's the other thing. Like, everyone working on a film, like, maybe they have an idea, but a lot of times they're thinking it will be good, and then they see it and they're like, for one reason or another, it didn't work. And I think one of the most difficult things as a critic is, there is no film you will review that is so bad that there is not something good about it. Everything has something good about it. Unless the camera literally falls over and no one picks it up again, there is something about that film which is redeeming. And it's to find that thing and try and write a balanced review, because a lot of critics on the internet especially, take a certain sadistic glee in sticking the boot in. And that's fun to do, and it's very easy to do, and it's really shitty journalism. It's like, ultimately, it's just like, there's something good in here, find it. You know, write a balanced review. Of course, you can give it 1 star and you can give it a kicking, but find the redeeming feature in there, so at least, you know, you've done your duty and you've, you know, tried to look at it for what it is, instead of kind of what you find it easy to write about. Because, and that's another thing, when you're writing a review, sometimes you're trying to fill a word count. Maybe you've seen a film, you don't have a lot to say about it, so you go off on one and you write this really entertaining thing kicking it, and it's like, maybe you didn't hate it, but that was an easy thing to write. And if that was the case, you probably want to rethink it, because again, you're not really doing what you saw, you know, justice.
I'm trying to think what the one redeeming feature would be for Mrs. Brown's Boys, the movie. Funnily enough, so I got bollocked by Sarah Phelps, who is a very well-established TV writer, gave me a proper dressing down for this, because Mrs. Brown's Boys won the, whatever it was, TV choice, whatever, something TV. What is it? It's a national NTA.
film. And that's it. That thing, which is voted for by the public.
Yeah.
And
therein lies the problem.
Yeah, and it beat Fleabag, whatever it is. And you know, me and Boyd were like wringing our hands over the death of society. And Sarah Phelps was like, no, absolutely fuck off. Because for some people whose lives are very, very difficult, and, you know, maybe have a shitty job and a miserable life, they come home and that show is like a big warm hug. It is like something that is easy for them to understand. It's not arch and a little bit smug like Fleabag is. You know, they don't have to think about the subtext. It's just, it's something comforting that takes them away from their life for a period of time, which made me feel like an absolute twat, quite frankly. But she's absolutely right. You know, it's not my cup of tea. It's very, very broad, and it's not particularly, you know, subtext rich. But you know, it's something that for a lot of people they really enjoy, and you know, works for them. So while I didn't see Mrs. Brown's Boys, the movie, and almost certainly will not, you know, I don't hate that it exists.
Okay.
So,
okay. Good answer, Liam.
I'm quite spoiler phobic. I hate it. Like I'm in JJ Abrams' camp on this, where he's like, there was a time, again, before you guys were born, when you like, sometimes, like when Star Trek Generations, like when the trailer for that dropped, I was in the cinema to watch something else, and I was like, oh my god, there's a fucking Star Trek Next Generation movie, and I lost my shit, and I had no idea it was even being made. And there's something magical about going to cinema, having no knowledge of what this film will be. And I think that's amazing. And I you know, I live for that. Like when I don't know if any of you watched what were we talking about on the way here? So Midnight Mass, Mike Flanagan's Netflix show, where you don't really know what's going on until episode 4. And I was like, everyone who watched it, like, read nothing about it, read no reviews, know nothing, because you want to go in completely cold so you can discover it like it's designed to be discovered. And I think, yeah, so, you know, as someone who peddles movie information, it's perhaps slightly problematic, but I do think it is better if you don't know anything about this stuff going in. I never read reviews of films before I've seen them, ever, because it ruins it for me. But your mileage may vary. I have a friend who genuinely seeks out spoilers before watching the film. He enjoys knowing everything going in. That's just the way his brain works. It's mental, but there you go.
Okay, who's next? Okay, over there.
Well, as in something that's not had release over here. We said, well, Snowpiercer took years to come over here. Bong Joon-ho's film, and like that was one of the things people like whispered around in hush room. Have you seen Snowpiercer? And it was like, what is Snowpiercer? And it genuinely took years to come here. So yeah, it's deeply frustrating when things like that happen. But I mean, nowadays, like Parasite, I think, Christ, we saw it so far before it came out over here. Because oftentimes they'll come off festivals or they'll screen them for critics, and sometimes maybe they don't even have distribution over here, and so you do see them a long time in advance, which is lovely. So we're in quite a privileged position. But yes, it's I must admit it is quite maddening sometimes when it's not even foreign language films. Like you get a lot of American films which just don't get UK distribution for ages for one reason or another, and you're just like, is this ever coming out? Like Wrath of Man, like Guy Ritchie's new film, that has taken so long to come out over here, so long. It's not out yet. Just because international distribution deals can be quite frustrating. So yeah, it can be a pain, but I don't think, as critics it maybe affects us slightly less because they tend to show them to us, anyway. Like, so for example, Top Gun Maverick, loads of people in the office have seen that because Paramount screened it, last summer. It's not coming out now until next summer because it's been pushed back so much.
Wow.
By that point, I'll have forgotten what's going on, but yeah.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more. We've got one in the middle there, and then Kaya. You've got one as well, Kaya. We'll be down to you.
Hi, James. I just wanted to ask, in terms of like a television show, like a Game of Thrones, that's worth like millions of pounds, do you review it kind of differently to a feature-length MCU film, for example?
It takes longer. Wheel of Time, for example, I had got 6 out of the 8 episodes, which is a 6-hour time investment to watch it. Sometimes we don't have that privilege. Like when we review stuff on Pilot, sometimes we have only seen the first 1 or 2 episodes, and that's all you can really work with. And sometimes that's not good. And we try, and like Boyd calls this a reverse ferret, which I think he got from somewhere. But he'll come back on and say, do you know what? That show we slagged off last week is actually really good. It picks up as it goes along, but we just didn't know that at the time. That is unfortunately the risk you take, because like we can't watch every episode of every show we do each week because the time does not exist. So yeah, I think it's so. If I'm reviewing in print though, rather than the podcast, then I will need to have seen a decent chunk. For example, again, Wheel of Time is embargoed, so I can't really use that as an example. But let us say, they I think are airing the first 3 episodes on day 1, and that is a very good thing. Because I think for some shows, like again, like maybe it's a pilot that you've got, so the pilot isn't representative of the show as a whole, or maybe it's because it has so much narrative they've got to get all the exposition done in episode 1. So TV shows can change significantly between the first episode and the subsequent ones. So yeah, it does mix things up, which I guess is why we do this thing at the beginning of the podcast where it's like, what have you been watching? And it's almost always, I've still been watching that thing we started last week and we were completely wrong, and this is why. So
Kaya, final question.
I'm not sure how relevant they are, but I've kind of got 2 questions.
Okay.
So what do you think when you're watching a film and the actor who played the character is well older than the character they're playing? Like Ben Platt recently in Here. And my second question is, my favourite actor is Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
What do you think of Wes Anderson films, and who's your favourite director?
I do not do whimsy. So Wes Anderson's output is a little bit lost on him. Let's just say there is a phrase in the office when a Wes Anderson trailer comes out where it's, so look, Wes Anderson has made his film again, which is perhaps a little bit harsh, but it's not really for me. He has a very specific style of filmmaking, which is not for everyone. And that is fine. I like Tenenbaums, to be fair, but that may be it. What was the other question? I've completely forgotten. Oh, age thing. Yes, Ben Platt is approximately 65 years old, so it makes no sense that he is playing a high school student. Well, he looks like an alien. Yes, they've used prosthetics and stuff to make it looks incredibly freaky. That said, if he wasn't playing that role, the film would never have got made. And he's extremely good. And I actually enjoyed that film a lot, despite him being 10 years too old for the part. But it's suspension of disbelief. Do you know what I mean? Like if I can believe that Timothée Chalamet is running away from a fucking sandworm, I can get my head around the fact that Ben Platt is maybe a little bit older than he's trying to be. Film and TV and stuff, it's magic. Do you know what I mean? It's smoke and mirrors. It's about giving yourself over to this experience that transports you to this other world. It's why it's so powerful. And I think, if occasionally they ask us to maybe take a few steps with them, I think that's fine.
And last question comes from a young lady, Terry White, from yesterday, and her question was, "Why are you such a bellend?"
Thank you, Terry. I feel that might have been a rhetorical question.
Most probably will.
Ah, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and make some noise for James Dyer. Wonderful stuff from James. Thank you very much. We've got one more session, two more sessions, in fact, this afternoon. 3 o'clock, Vicky Sparks is on the way. And then also we'll have David Ornstein at 4 o'clock in here, unless he cancels again.